Welcome back, everyone. Glad you've all enjoyed your morning tea. Now, we'll just recommence our hearing, and we have Mr. Alan Macaulay as our first submitter this morning. Please, Alan, come and take a seat. And I'll just remind everyone, you have 10 minutes. If you would like some questions, please leave an opportunity for that. I will give you a wave of my hand if we're getting near the 10 minutes so that you can either wrap up and leave a few moments. Please, you may sit or stand, and the purple button on your microphone, because we are being recorded and people do like to be able to hear what's being said. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. If I'm still here in 10 minutes, don't wave, just throw me out. But you have my submission, and I don't intend to read it, but there are just 3 points that I would like to elaborate on. The first is that I have great sympathy for those and the families of those who find themselves involved in some form of addiction. Some people might consider my attitude to some of these things to be rather harsh, but I stand by my role and contributions that I've made over many years to those that are probably less fortunate than I am. But having said that, there is always a line to be drawn. And as an example, I would give you, I spoke with a friend a couple of weeks ago who was a retailer, not in Rotorua. A 17-year-old girl had been stealing from his shop. He was asked to attend a family conference, and there were a considerable number of family turned up. At the end of it all, he found that this whole thing was his problem, in that he made articles in his shop too available for people to steal. And the solution apparently was that he should inconvenience 99% of his customers to protect that one person. No sign of any acceptance of any responsibility from either the 17-year-old girl or the large number of family present. And that is where a line needs to be drawn. I think it's very clear to me that we can do what we can, and the gaming industry is already doing a lot by way of levies they pay to the problem gambling. But you cannot penalise the vast majority of people for the sake of a few. Which brings me to the second point. I've been involved in many organisations, and I'm still involved in many organisations that apply and continue to apply. In fact, that's my job this afternoon, to make an application to a trust for money for a sporting club. One of the big problems that organisations have these days, sporting and otherwise, is that it is a huge problem to get people involved in the administration of these things. Because one of the things that people hate doing is joining an organisation. They can't do what they joined the organisation for because they're too busy going out finding money for this and finding money for that. It's a big turn-off for the people who are essentially the backbone of the community, the people that are going out, joining things and doing things. And any move to restrict the access that these people have to funds that they need to keep going is very much a detrimental step. My third point is one that I feel quite strongly about, and that is the ability of a person to carry out their business in a lawful manner. If you're in the gaming industry, it would appear, and I'm not, so I assume this to be, but if you have a row with your landlord, well, what are you going to do? If you can't shift your business to the place down the road, which still complies with the district's plan, it still complies with most council policies. But what do you do? If your landlord makes life so miserable for you, do you have to grin and bear it because the council policy on relocation of businesses relating to gaming make it too hard or too difficult? And I just think that is wrong. It's as simple as that. That is just wrong. So those are the 3 points I wish to elaborate on, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alan. That's fantastic. Now, questions around the table. I don't think there are any questions, Alan, and I think that's really because you have given us a very thorough submission here today, and the points you've made are quite clear, and I'm sure are echoed by other people in the community. And I'd just like to congratulate you on all your work for voluntary organisations over the years, because you're dead right. You are the very person you're speaking about, those that dedicate a lot of time to those organisations to help them run. Mr. Thomas, excellent. A question.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I had something in my mouth, so it wasn't appropriate to speak earlier on. I was hoping someone had asked a question before me. Through you, I just wonder, when we were looking at the changes to the policy, the no relocation, I understand in the suggested policy, people will be able to apply to relocate in exceptional circumstances. What they have to do is come back to council and ask council for that rather than it being a right. Would you see that going some way towards addressing the issue that you'd raised about someone having an argument with their landlord and not being able to move? So in that situation, they would be able to come back to council and say, just, it's not working with our landlords, we do need to relocate. Can we relocate our gambling machines?
What you're saying relies on the word exceptional circumstances. And I personally don't believe that a business owner should have to rely on exceptional circumstances. If all other things are equal, if he's in shop space A, it complies with the district plan, it complies with every, other normal things you need to comply with. He's not next door to the school or whatever it is. Provided B meets the same criteria, let him go. I mean, you don't have to, I don't believe you should have to get an exceptional circumstance before you're allowed to do it. If all other things are equal, let him carry out his business in the normal way.
Absolutely.
On that line, I think that's great and well and good when everything works well. What do you do when there is a licence holder in a probably not the right place, but legitimately there, and other tenants wishing to take up opportunities around, so don't want to be there because it's, it doesn't feel good having to go past this place into my business every day? How do you manage that as a council?
Well, stiff pickies. It's if a bloke is there, he's there. Right. And short of having a right, and throwing out the tenants, the council, and the whole lot, what can you do? I mean, if the bloke is there historically, make it easy for him to move somewhere else, but don't tell him he has to go just because somebody else is.
No, we can't.
Yeah.
Thank you. There are no further questions from anyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Macaulay, for your time this morning and your submission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next submitter this morning is Tanya Pijou from New Zealand Community Trust, and also Mike Nell, the Chief Executive, and we have a PowerPoint, which will just get loaded. Thank you. And Tanya, if I have mispronounced your surname, please pronounce it correctly.
Yes, it's actually Pegis.
Pegis, okay. Thank you.
Hi, so yes, I am Tanya Pegis, and this is our Chief Executive of NZCT, Mike Nell. Mike's going to kick off and say a few words to you this morning, just in support of our submission, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, and kia ora. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to be here today. This is just a quick slide presentation because I do want to leave as much time for questions as possible. Not speaking exactly word for word, but the vast majority of players do so with gaming machines for entertainment. We know that. A sinking lid, no relocations policy will destroy the essential fundraising infrastructure for your community. Building owners hold all power, but no obligations under the Gambling Act. There's no incentives to reinvest, to keep venues modern, and can actually work against the venue operator. So in effect, that entrenches the venue operator. So we would say, or plea, that the current relocations policy is a little bit too restrictive. And finally, the third bullet point there, the ultimate question about the funding, it simply won't go away. There's no simple answer to replace funding that we're aware of. And we have this threat of the internet, which again is attracting our youth to gambling in uncontrolled environments. Next time. So distance and location, the questions previous, I won't repeat them, but they do have an influence on gambling behaviour. And again, just come back to that word in your policy about a balance, I think speaks volumes for itself. Who will miss out if the funding's not there? Unfortunately, it is our kids, our children. We are biased towards sport, particularly kids, and getting kids into sport. We know the benefits of that, and we absolutely understand the calling on volunteers and administrators in sport today is more intense than ever, and that's growing. So we do just raise that as a point which I'm sure you're well aware of. So just summing this up quickly, overall gaming trusts are returning around 260 million. We believe strongly that there should be the balanced approach. And if we look at that evidence over time and we look at your objectives in your policy about controlling growth, overall in New Zealand since 2003, the number of machines have come down from 25,000 to about 16,200 at the moment, and we've got that flat line there for problem gambling. In saying that, we take our corporate responsibility seriously. I'm pleased to tell you from, I believe, a sector perspective too, that there's been a lot of collaboration take place in the last 2 years with HPA and MOH, and I think we're seeing advances. And to sum up with where we can further invest in harm minimisation and technology, I just refer to the Flavel Bill and some of those points. There's some work that we should all encourage to invest in around that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nell. Now I'll open that up for questions. Councillor Kent, then Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for your submission. Can I ask, I've looked at so many submissions, I can't remember actually having seen anywhere any evidence that says if you reduce the number of machines, does it actually reduce the amount of dollars spent on poker machines?
No, there's no evidence to say that there's a direct correlation between the number of machines and the number spent. If you go to the 25,000 machines that were there in 2003, yes, we did have turnover, about the $1 billion turnover. We're down to 16,200. We've seen a stabilisation in gaming revenue probably in the last 18 months. But the interesting point of that, it's very aligned to CPI. So when you had a dramatic decrease, we don't believe that was taking the machines away. It was just a matter of probably an overpopulated environment of machines.
Thank you, and Mayor Chadwick.
Yes, thank you for coming, Mike, and also for this community's a beneficiary of funding, and we all know that. And so it's a balancing act, this one, about how we fill the gap, really. For our sinking lid policy, you said the beneficiaries are the children in a community, but you give to many other activities like our lakeside concert and crankworks and other things like that. Why did you just single out the children?
Mainly because we are a society that was primarily set up for sport, with a strong focus particularly in youth. So that's our first deeds objective. The other deeds objectives rightfully point out, like you did, Mayor, that there's other community good like hospices, World Master Games, all those things that get people active.
Are there any further questions from around the table? Yes, Councillor Tapson.
Thank you very much for your presentation and your PowerPoint. It's also very helpful when we have a PowerPoint. Just a question, looking more into the submission, the full submission that you provided us, and you'll talk about supporting it because of the hospitality sector. Now, we have had, obviously, submitters this morning, as you would have heard, Tanya, about talking about having gaming machines, but the advantage of not having gaming machines in an area where there's alcohol provided. So I'd just like to hear more in detail your support for against this policy for the hospitality sector, and why you think that it would align so well with the hospitality sector, and whether there should be alcoholic beverages provided alongside there or not.
Yeah, just going back to, sorry, have my questions?
No, sorry.
I don't quite see that correlation between alcohol and gamblers that was presented earlier in the context that it was. A lot of gamblers, I believe, do go in and have entertainment on the machines without drinking vast, if any, consumption of alcohol. But it was probably a miss of me, Councillor, that I didn't point out that these gaming machines are in very controlled environments with very, very good operators. I'd sum it up in one word: professional. That's their business, and they add to the community.
Okay, there appear to be no further questions. So thank you very much for coming to present today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Mr. Eru Loach from the Problem Gambling Foundation. Kia ora and welcome, and please introduce you at the table. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Beside me I have Whaia Hariata Kohunui, who works here at Te Kahui Hauora Trust. They also have a problem gambling contract with the Ministry of Health. My name is Eru Loach, and I work for the Problem Gambling Foundation and have done so for at least the last 4 years, and prior to that I worked at Te Kahui Hauora for a year, and prior to that for about 4 years down in Invercargill at one of their health and social services there, Ngāki Te Mātauranga Paunama, also working in health promotion within the problem gambling sector. And prior to that I was in the police down there for 16 years. So, and I think one of the, and listening to a lot of the conversations, and I'll cover these bits off first before I talk a little bit around some of the things included in our PGF submission, is around how the dissemination of community funding is going out, and what that means in relation to the policy. And look, I played rugby when I was younger and for many years, and I played a little bit of netball when I was at high school. My wife worked as a coach force development for Waikato Bay of Plenty. So it was always a laugh when her vehicle was parked up next to mine, which had Gambling Society decals on the outside of it, and I had Problem Gambling Foundation on my vehicle. But one of the things that was of interest, and I kept on challenging her, was, but where do you get some of the funding for the work that you do? And she said, oh, you know, from gambling societies. But I said, no, where do you get the funding from? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, you know, with all the discussions that we have, that, and there's research to support that, is that anywhere from 40 to 60% of that funding comes from people that have problem gambling issues. And so when we look at the amount of money that's lost or spent on problem gambling within the Rotorua district, and if you convert that to 40 to 60%, depending on the scale of where their problem gambling is, those are coming from people that can least afford it and have significant gambling issues. Now, Rotorua has, most of their gambling venues are located in high deprivation areas. very high, more so than most of the districts I would think in the country. And you would find that in a lot of the other districts that have high deprivation areas in majority of their district, they also are significantly high in the amount of money that's lost within those particular areas in their districts. And who lives there? Our Māori, our Pacifica, beneficiaries and our elderly. These are the same people that mainly come through our doors as clients. This is throughout the country, not just the Problem Gambling Foundation, but Problem Gambling Services. They're connected. You can't separate one from the other. Where they are located is where our people that can least afford it live. So when I flip back to what it means to the community funding again and who's receiving it, having a strong policy, as has been the preferred option, obviously a strong sinking lid with no relocation, is not going to immediately affect people receiving funding. The only way that that would occur is if that particular venue loses their gambling license. That will only occur if a venue is not being compliant with the Gambling Act. Otherwise, someone else, so the venue itself coming in is not going to change, the community funding going out is not going to change. In fact, with legislation changes and amendments, there's more money going back out into communities now than there has been in the past, regardless of the reduction of machines and venues over time. And that's why we've plateaued out. So yes, there's been a drop in the number of machines because some of those machines historically in 2003 and beyond, but certainly when the Act came into play in 2003, 2004, and then we saw the drop in machines because of compliance issues and other reasons. So I think when it comes to community funding going out to sporting clubs, any other applicants for funding, that's not going to change. And I think we need to put our heads in the right space as a council, what that means for you as a council, and what it really means in relation to what harm looks like. And I think one thing that and Rotorua has been in the media more so perhaps in other places around what family violence looks like. And we've certainly got our fair share of bad rep here. Now, family violence and gambling exists. And I want to take you back to a time when I was working at Te Kahui Hauora, and I had a conversation with one of the local police officers at the BP, filling up with petrol and so forth. So I had a conversation with him, and I said, let's have a chance and have a catch-up so we can talk about, gambling and family violence. He said, yeah. So we teed up a meeting a couple of weeks later, and I sent him some information then. At that stage, we didn't have any New Zealand research that was strong enough to support it, but I provided some of the international stuff and what was going on, and I knew that there was no data and no questions on the family violence documentation when they attended family violence incidents. So I knew that there was very little. So we had this meeting a couple of weeks later, and he apologised to me, and he said, I had no idea. He said when he got back to the station and spoke to 5 or 6 others, and they all laughed about it, having a meeting with me, because they didn't believe that family violence and gambling were connected. Now, as in May, the Ministry of Health has published a document that they had got some research done by AUT, and it's connecting now. It's connecting family violence and gambling. So if you want to know what harm looks like, that's an indication of where harm is at. Is Rotorua involved? Definitely, as is every other district in the country. But we can no longer look at harm as the dollars lost by individuals gambling. And I understand that there is some misinformation or misunderstanding that individuals alone should take responsibility. Yes, they do. But if they understood that these machines, gambling machines, create the same addiction and the same release of chemicals in the brain as those of drugs such as methamphetamine. They're the only non-chemically induced product that creates that same release. And it causes the same things in relation to addiction. Therefore, this is a dangerous, addictive product that's allowed to be in our country because of legislation and the community funding model that exists. Which is fine. Hey, look, community funding, we all have different sports, community groups and so forth that apply for funding. I'm not challenging that at all. It's a wonderful model, but what it has also done is it has gagged some of our community and businesses to become and sit at the table and tell you what it's really like. I spoke to 2 businesses here in Rotorua if they were interested in doing a submission, and they said, look, you know, we've been around for years and years, and we would like to. We totally agree with the council's preferred option for a sinking lid and no relocation, but we apply for community funding. And if we put our name in there and we're identified, we perceive that we'll lose that funding in the future. This exists. This exists in Rotorua, but it exists throughout the country. Now, harm is real. I've seen it through family violence. I also know around this, even more so around suicide. Now, people around who have suicidality or thoughts of committing suicide, the highest percentage of them, more than anything else, have identified that gambling issues or harm caused by gambling is the primary reason. Now, we can't ignore that. Family violence and suicide are high on the government's agenda. They had a family violence summit in Wellington last week, and it's high on the agenda. The Prime Minister was there, 4 MPs were there, they workshopped through the day, and it was live streamed for the keynote speakers and so forth. So what we're saying is we need to look bigger than the community funding, or than the funding coming out of our individuals' pockets. The harm that exists is bigger than that alone. The data from the police does not exist. And recently we've had some feedback from the New Zealand Police Director of Research and Evaluation. He wanted some time to have a look on the computer to look for any people or victims of family violence that had identified gambling as a factor. So we gave him the 4 weeks. And I spoke to our operations manager and I said, he's not going to find anything. And she said, I know, but we have to give him the time to find that himself. And sure enough, nothing. Now this is significant because there are 2 pilots currently being done and changes in the family violence process. One in Hamilton, one in Christchurch. And in that new process, there's nothing to do with gambling harm. That needs to change. And Rotorua City Council can lead that by having a strong policy, sinking lid with no relocation, which isn't going to affect those recipients of community funding, but recognising the harm being caused in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Loach. Now, I'll just open that up for questions around the table. Yes, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora kōrua mō your presentation. Firstly, thank you for such a detailed submission. It was actually very helpful going through this and reading all the statistics from a public health opinion. So from your expertise in public health, well, you know, and of course we've had many from the community, in particular the low-income areas, asking us to please get these out of those low-income areas in the suburbs. So from your opinion in public health lens, shall I say, do you think that, and this is just because I see in your recommendation a strong point on restricting the number of venues is more crucial than the number of machines. Now, how do you think, what would your recommendation be to council in terms of those areas? Is it significant in those low income areas in particular where they are, or is this a public health issue across the entire district of Rotorua?
Kia ora whaia. Yeah, it's, I think initially we have to look after those high deprivation communities, the ones who are more at risk and more vulnerable. And as we know as Māori, and I'm not talking exclusively either, you know, all people, we have our children to consider, we have our grandchildren to consider, and we have to set a legacy for and a standard for, you know, for what is right, not what appears to be right through some statistics that's rolled out. And I think initially, let's try and move them out of those communities if possible. But again, even better than that, let's, if a venue wishes to relocate, let's not allow that at all. Because actually the real harm is that the machines exist and they're located in these venues. So I think moving them from one place to another doesn't stop a gambler from travelling from here to there. In fact, throughout most of the country, where they do have relocation as an option, they allow them to move into CBDs. And yet we know moving into a CBD is where all buses go to. So transportation is cheap to get there. And so I think let's move that out of the picture. So some may consider that as an option, but personally I think we need to move the cause, and that is the number of machines and the venues themselves. Let them close of their own reasons, like non-compliance, for example, with the Gambling Act. But I think with the amount of gambling spend now, which is obviously I'm passionate about doing what's right for people, that I think let's just target the cause and then wrap around those support services like play more rugby, play more netball, get
Thank you,
involved in the
Mr.
other
Loach.
things.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to hold you there. You have gone over your 10 minutes, so there will be no further questions, but thank you for that, and thank you very much for representing Problem Gambling Foundation, and I'm sure our community will look forward to those pilot results coming through and seeing if that makes a change at central government, because the legislation really for that, to include those statistics about the link between family violence and gambling, is really in their court. So thank you again. Thank you.
And before I go, and I'll do this as I depart, is and I've attended a lot of submission hearings throughout the country, and Rotorua and the work done leading up to this is outstanding, and never before have I seen the work that's been done. Yes. And I just wanted to take my hat off to all involved and the council to supporting that. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. We'll certainly pass that on to the staff who have worked behind the scenes to get this to this point. Thank you. Now, our next submitter is Sharon Black, and that's on page 12 from the Rotorua Community Hospice Trust. Thank you, Sharon. Yes, and just please introduce the other lady at the table. Thank you. Let's turn your microphone on. Thank you, Sharon. The purple button. That's right. There'll be a red light. That's perfect.
That makes a difference. So, kia ora. Firstly, my colleague, Jen Morgan, who is our Funding and Development Manager for Rotorua Community Hospice Trust. Your Worship, the Mayor, Chairman, and fellow councillors, thank you for the opportunity to come here today to present to you from hospice perspective and the actual good that the gaming trust machines do in our community for the likes of our services. I'm not here to obviously present the effects that it has on families, on our community as far as an addiction goes. I'm here to show you statistically and tell you statistically what they do for the community as a service provider in this community, because we would not survive without these gaming machines. So, utmost and foremost, I think really is to just give you a little bit of brief, and that is that Rotorua Community Hospice last year cared for 409 patients. We had 330 referrals, and those patients were in care on an average of 173 days. 56% of those were cancer patients and 44% were non-cancer. So that was heart, stroke, neurological, renal failure, etc. 30% of those were Māori. Our nursing team did 11,234 home visits and 594 home visits after hours. I think the nice thing about Rotorua Community Hospice is we are a community-based hospice and it is owned by the community. 80% of our patients died in their own homes. And by that I mean they died in the bed of their choice, and that was with their loved ones around them. 11% of those patients died in hospital, and quite often that is because we can't either get them out in time, or they do choose to stay in hospital because it's a safe environment for them to die in. Now, we've funded approximately 60% of our income from the DHB. Last financial year it cost $1.8 million to run the hospice here in this community, and the DHB gave us, well actually last year was about 53%. Now we have received in the past 2 years, and I just did a snapshot so that you know exactly where we're at, we've received from Gaming Trust the following. So for our wage assist, and that's our nurses' wages, because we always apply for front line, it's never the back line or behind the scenes, it's what's actually out there with patients. We've been assisted by $100,000 in nurses' wages, $90,000 in patient equipment, so that's where one of the very few hospices that supply equipment to our patients rather than our local DHB. So that's our oxygen concentrators, beds, lifting, stools, that type of thing, and fuel for our nurses' cars. They also helped with telecommunication, and also a big one, which was funded by one of our local community grants here, which was First Sovereign, is our electronic patient management record. Now, as you know, we've come into the world of electronics, and our nurses have to input all patient notes into an electronic system which can be accessed by GPs and the DHB through the back end if a doctor presents to themselves. So that 2 years running now has been funded by First Sovereign, as well as other money from them. Now, the other arm of these gaming machines is also, and this is where Jan maybe can speak to you later on about this, is events. Now, we run our own events to try to raise funds in the community. Now, as you know, to run an event like Dancing with the Stars, the costs of that is astronomical. $70,000 just for stage and lighting. But we actually have a very good person in AVT, and they do subsidise that quite drastically. But with the likes of our street appeals and that type of thing, we were given $69,350 in the last 2 years towards our events, which allowed us then to make, you know, money and funds in the community. You're most all aware that we have a building project underway, and hopefully at the end of June of this year it will be completed. Now, our gaming trust, our local gaming trust machines gave us $449,500 for that build. It's a $1.7 million build. The other has come from the likes of Rect and Bay Trust. We have not had to physically go to the community for any funds. And the reason that and the rationale behind that was, if we do that, that will affect the money that the community gives us for our operational costs to run the organisation and patient care. So that's, you know, that's a huge thing. On that note, I think that I need to let you know, we approached lotteries, so that's our lotto, and put an application in for our building project, thinking that we would fit right within their criteria to build a new hospice. We were declined because we were not using other services to provide our service. So, you know, you sort of think, well, lotteries would give us money, they're out there with the lotto, etc., so forth, whereas our local gaming community funders did, and also Southern Trust in the South Island gave us substantially good money as well. So, you know, as I say, $1.8 million to operate the hospice. Our service is completely free of charge. Our clinical wages is our greatest expense, and the DHB income only just covers the clinical wages. All other parts of the service is run by grants, fundraising, service clubs, bequests and donations, and our 2 retail shops. We put a lot of emphasis into those retail shops. We, in the new building, are moving into the future. I submitted some statistics with out to 2038 for you to all to look at, and I mean it's quite an in-depth piece of documentation that I gave you. But we have to grow our service. We need to go with a medical specialist so that we can have a medical specialist on site for our patients. We need to put in a grief and loss counsellor. We've put in a social worker. We're going to volunteers in homes, and you know, I think that the other thing is that rest homes also, aged residential care facilities are being hit, and we are now putting a liaison nurse in all aged residential care facilities in Rotorua to assist them with palliative patients because they don't have the specialist needs and requirements. But I think the big thing is that the number of deaths is 800 in 2016, and that will go to, that was 646 of those deaths were palliative. By 2038 we will have 915 deaths, and of those just over 800 will be palliative. And Specifically, the biggest increase will be in our 85 to 94-year-olds. That will increase by 104%, and 95 years plus will be 156%. I'm 60 this year, and statistically I'm one of those 95 plus. And that is because we have medicalised death and dying in this country. We're all living longer. So, you know, where to from here for our service, I don't know. But I think I'd be very saddened, or hospice would be very saddened, to see the closing lid, no allocation, further allocation of gaming machines.
I'll just, if you want to leave a little bit of time for questions, you've got about a minute left.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll be quiet, shall I? No, so, you know, I mean, from a hospice perspective, we could not survive without these machines.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Jan. Now, questions, are there any? Yes, Mayor Steve.
Sharon and Jan, and for the work you do, were you heartened to hear from Edu from the Problem Gambling Foundation that the sinking lid won't impact on the amount of funding for distribution to our community?
I actually don't know how that would work, because we really, as a community, have a very small operational amount of gaming trusts, as in First Sovereign, etc. We go out of the community, the likes of Southern Trust and those ones. Yeah. Perhaps, Jan, you could enlighten a little bit more on that. I think if they do...
I think there's only a certain amount of money to go round, and there's an awful lot of deserving charities that apply for funds. And so that will impact. It may impact dramatically if they are reduced, because it will lessen the amount of money to go around to organisations like us.
Yeah, and what's to not stop those gamblers taking that money out of Rotorua area to the likes of Waikato, Tauranga, etc., and therefore that funding would be granted in those areas and not into ours. Perhaps it's more of a wider issue than the closing lid.
With your DHB funding sitting at 53%, how has that moved over the last 5 years?
It's actually gone backwards. Yeah. Other than, as you know, one of the election promises with the national government last round was that if they got in, that they would actually directly give money to hospices around the country direct from the ministry, which is unheard of. But that had very specific criteria. We had to introduce new services into our service, and that's exactly what we did in Rotorua by employing a social worker, a volunteer coordinator for volunteers in homes, etc. So they were money for specific projects.
Hey, now, are there any further questions? No. Thank you. And thank you both. And let me just take this opportunity to thank you for the incredible work you do in our community. I don't think there's anyone around the table that doesn't know someone that has benefited from the work of hospice.
And that's our pleasure, and thank you very much for the time for being able to submit to you today.
Thank you. Now, our next submitter is Kerry Bird, the CEO of the First Sovereign Trust, and we have a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Please either stand or sit, and as long as you turn your microphone on, that'll be fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Bird.
Kia ora tātou to the councillors, Mayor Stevie Chadwick and to the Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. Quite a big decision, I think, in front of Council, because it really will impact on our industry moving forward, because once these machines, if they're lost forever, and the benefits accruing from those machines are gone. And just before I start the slide, the industry has been in decline since 2003 and has been shrinking from a $330 million giveaway, and as Mike said, we're down to $260 million. The only thing that's been stable in the whole process is that problem gaming hasn't changed. So that's flatlined, and it hasn't been, there's no correlation between problem gaming and the number of machines that are currently running. And in our submission, there's the information that refers to that. But I'd just like to give a bit of background. We set the trust up in Rotorua 14 years ago. Malcolm Short is the chairman, Murray Patchell, Peter Anu and Kevin Whitehead are the Rotorua-based trustees. And over that time, we've seen gaming machines reduced from 25,000 down to 16,000. And at the same time, the available giveaway also decrease. So that correlation is real. And we'd just like to, I'd just like to acknowledge New Zealand Community Trust and all of the supporters of a status quo in terms of the policy, which we support. So the next slide basically is, and I've only got a few slides, but basically I just want to summarise the correlation of the current cap in Rotorua has reduced from 580 machines to 377, which is effectively in line with the national trend. So we're in step with the national reduction in machines. The problem gaming rate has remained constant. So if you choose to do something with the numbers of machines, the research shows it hasn't changed problem gaming levies. And the rate is quite low. And that's in our submission. But what I'd really like to talk to Council today about is the framework for the decision policy. And I've just pulled from stats the population growth in Tauranga, only 80 kilometres from the top of Nongataha to the top of Mount. And you can see the difference in the population growth from low, medium and high. And the same for Rotorua. Currently we're at 70,500 people in Rotorua. And there is some risk that we could actually lose population between now and 2043 down to 7,100. So a population decrease. So that's out of Stats New Zealand. So the real issue is about the framework around which we design our policy. And so the thing about that is that what we need to make sure is that we have a policy which grows investment and jobs, and around those investment and jobs is also construction around our tourism industry. So the tourism snapshot, and this is done by Destination Rotorua, Tourism Rotorua. They have a really good infograph on all of the key drivers around our tourism. You can see it's a $780 million industry. Bed nights, domestic spend, international spend. We've got all the KPIs down. So the real challenge, and what Destination Rotorua has, is a $1 billion annual spend through to 2030. So the question for the Council is a framework which invites investment into our tourism and hospitality industry. And that is the real challenge. So how do we go from 530 million to $1 billion? We enable relocation. We don't constrain the number of gaming machines. And we build a world-class entertainment precinct. That's a vision. That's a roadmap. The equity to our existing business owners. If for some chance they have fire, earthquake, lease termination or change of use, they're locked in, they can't move. It also means that whoever comes to town and wants to spend some money on refreshing our entertainment precincts can't move our gaming venues to a purpose-built entertainment area where we can have better controls over people coming and going. Police studies have already shown that dedicated areas are far easier to manage. And just think if we had one of those available on Saturday for the Lions tour. That's what we need to be doing with our framework. I understand there's a lot of data about good and bad, but what the Council needs to do is the impact around the policy and the social impact on our community if we get this wrong. Stats New Zealand has already indicated that we are in risk of maybe going backwards in our population. What we need to do is enable. You want me to give you the link? I'm sure it's in my document. And so what I really want to do is to then talk about why we need the status quo. And in fact, there should be an option 5, and the option 5 should be significantly more liberal movement of gaming machines within 100 metres of each other. There's no correlation to harm, and relocation enables fairness for business owners and enables investment. And that's what we need in Rotorua. Lastly, just in terms of the sentiment from government has moved significantly from where we were since 2003. This is an excerpt from Minister Peter Dunn, speech to the Hospitality Association, and there's some clear points in there. The level of funding to community from Class 4 gambling has dropped significantly in real terms since 2004. That's inflation-adjusted returns to our community has decreased. Potentially there are a number of reasons for this, and the example that he has is the limitation on venues and machine numbers in the market since the Act was passed, specifically talking to the proposal in front of this committee. And I have to say that the proposal in front of this committee, Rotorua Council is one of the few councils now considering such a restrictive policy. Most councils now have moved to a more moderate path. Taking into account we've reduced our gaming machines from 518 down to 377, it doesn't make sense. He goes on to say he wants to maintain sustainable funding stream for good causes delivered by trusted and reputable operators. We've been in the industry 14 years. I'm not sure how long New Zealand Community Trust has been there, but whoever's in the industry now has been there a long time. And we're also really committed to improving our harm minimisation protocols and effectively working on those as a matter of priority for the trust and the industry is in general. And he also wants to act which is fit for future, one that is flexible enough to meet the challenges that lie ahead. And I would suggest that the restrictive policy that has been promulgated doesn't future-proof our ability to maintain this, this very important funding source.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bird. Now I'll open that for questions. Yes, Mayor Chadwick.
Thank you, Kerry, for coming. And your comments, I didn't get your correlation between population and Tauranga population, because that's not what we have in our Refresh of Vision 2030 that does look at economic growth in our district. I'm not sure where you were making that correlation or how you linked it up.
I suppose if we look down the spine of New Zealand, we go Auckland and Hamilton, significant growth. You get to the T intersection, you can go left over the Kaimais or right through the Mamakus. And the economic drivers are significantly different in terms of growth. Tourism as a service industry provides jobs like no other, bigger than the dairy industry. And so by restricting the gaming policy, it does restrict investment, and it does restrict the development of a facility like Eat Street. And so the correlation is that if we don't enable those little things that make the boat go faster, then we're going to end up with a slow boat. And if we dumb down the industry, all we're going to end up with is a dumb industry. Unfortunately, I did not. I'm Malcolm Short, who's also the chairman of the trust, and you know there are people who are looking for investment opportunities in Rotorua. What we want to make sure is that we don't have policy which restricts investment. You know, we've had Crankworks. We're looking at helping council launch Mudfest in December. There's significant benefit. I take on board we have to manage harm, and we're committed to doing that.
Okay, now it would need to be a quick one, Councillor Donaldson, because we're out of time.
Yeah, thank you through you, Madam Chair. Kerry, just interested in your submission in the comparison between online gaming and pokie machines, for want of a bit of a term, and we've heard the contention that the poker machines are seductive. They suck the problem gambler in. Are you able to comment on, because I have no experience, of the online gambling experience? Is it, in your view, equally or less?
When you have a look at what's on television, and you see Mark Stafford from the TAB rolling around at every All Black game giving the odds, and you pick up a tablet or your smartphone to place your bet, then we're rolling towards the digital transformation of gaming, which at this stage is uncontrolled. Our advantage in terms of having these collective pubs with good harm is that we're really working at trying to identify harmful behaviour and then move them to the right services for treatment. You know, the government gets $18 million a year.
Just going to have to stop you there because we are, traversing information that we have covered. So thank you for that question, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we do have some other submitters. And we try and keep everyone at 10 minutes to keep it a fair, level playing field.
Well, we're just trying to even it up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bird. Now, our next submitter this morning is Vincent Whitewood, and that's on page 14. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. I'd just like to pass my condolences to Stevie on the passing of your husband. Just like to acknowledge you, and it's good that you're here and back on your feet, and you're here today to listen to these submissions. And I apologise. I'm used to standing when I speak, but I'm waiting for a knee reconstruction, so I'm going to sit. Well, my submission is from, and I've got the flu, a two-pronged approach. One, I want to buy an established business in town, a bar, with pokie machines. I submitted a letter to the CEO a month ago, and I got a reply to wait till July till these submissions were completed. So that's my interest as a prospective businessman. Now, I don't want to put down a big substantial outlay for something I may not have in the near future. I'm in a precarious position. A building we're going to occupy, the landlord may not be there. The building may not exist in 18 months to 2 years' time, because they want to revamp it and turn it into another block, and they're not sure whether they'll have a bar in there, so it means we'll have to move. Now, for me and my wife to submit such a financial outlay for something that won't exist, but sitting here listening to all the submissions, and I hear what everybody says, I actually believe the council has orchestrated their own demise. Why? We've had this policy going back 2003, 2004. As a council, your predecessors and some people still at this table who are part and parcel of it, you haven't managed your processes or your systems. To me, it's a systemic failure. I'll give you some examples. And this is not a slight on any of the other community trusts that are in here. It's just an example. Out of the 300 plus machines, 220 of the machines are owned by just 3 gaming trusts, and 2 of them are in this room. And I don't want to mention names, but that's just an example. We've had buildings closed down like the RSA. We've set precedent, the council has set precedent. The Rotorua Club was an example. They allowed them to move to the racecourse. The RSA was sold. Valentine's was sold. The gaming licenses could have been defunct, but they were allowed to hold on to for 18 months, 2 years, and now they relocated. And now, me as a new businessman, I'm going to suffer from that bad process, that bad management. And this is some of the things that we've allowed to think. Now, also on top of that, we go on about problem harm, that sort of thing. Yet we've got just as many bottle stores setting up on every corner in this community of ours as there is existing TABs. So the problem we're looking at, the problem we're trying to solve, isn't one of gambling. It's only a part of it. It's only a very small part. And at the end of the day, it's an individual's choice, like everything else. I don't drink, smoke, or gamble. But I'm coming here from a business perspective. I've got here, you've read my submissions. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but you as a council, within your control, allowed relocations to take place to the benefit of a few trusts based on who the people are within this community. Also, where a business has ceased for whatever reason, allowed gambling licences to exist, albeit without a venue or premise. Now, I've just touched on that our social issues are bigger than just gambling. But I believe the council has a bigger role to play in this community, and it should be to do with employment, housing, environmental, health and infrastructure, which we all know are dismal at the moment within our community. And to target something like this and put a sinking lid policy isn't going to solve the problem. And yes, we all know that the council, some of the community events that are run are some of the biggest benefactors of the trusts that are sitting in this room now. But that's neither here nor there. Now, I'm taking that hat off, and I'm coming from a perspective, and I believe, I know the Bay of Plenty CEO, Mike Rogers, spoke here this morning. From his perspective, I'm coming from that perspective as a parent, as governance in 4 different sporting bodies within this community, and we rely on funding heavily. The examples, I don't know whether Mike Rogers gave them from the Bay Rugby Union, and I think I can speak for soccer. The numbers that have declined throughout this country in terms of sport. We talk about social impacts, and it's going to be even greater when parents take their kids out because we can't afford to play up at the stadium on the bottom fields because the costs are too exorbitant. The parents don't like that cost. JAB, I'll give you an example. There's currently 1,200, 1,300 kids playing JAB up at the fields at the stadium. They're 13 years and under. 12 months ago, there were 1,700 kids. Because of the cost to the kids and to the rugby clubs and to the parents, our parents are very apathetic today. They rather take their kids out and not pay $20, $30. Well, this year it's $100 for kids to partake in a sport. So they rely on the funding. And they're already being turned down. As we speak, the JAB to function, and they're quarter or 2/3 through their season, need $11,000 to function. That's to provide first aid up there on the weekend for all the parents and people. They have 2 medevac people up there. Those sorts of costs, and they rely on funding. They've been denied by the trust for whatever reason this time round, so they still have to find those dollars. But that comes back to the clubs, the rugby clubs that total with those kids, and it gets passed on to us. And it's just a vicious circle. But the point I'm making here is what we need to do is find a happy medium. It's not about a sinking lid policy. It's for all of us as a council, administrators, as sporting people, as trusts, to coexist in a controlled environment. And we have that controlled environment now. I've heard other speakers. I was part of my background, I was part of Pauatatu. It's a paper, there's people in this room, was social impacts on people and kids in our country. It was made for the government. I was part of that process back in the early 80s and 90s, and it's just coming to fruition now, and it's being published. And what I'm saying, there's no correlation between gambling, problem gambling. We've got alcohol, TABs, that sort of thing. They all contribute to our social issues. But what I'm saying is problem gambling isn't the be-all and end-all. The sinking lid policy, to me, I reckon the council have got it wrong. You shouldn't be looking at that. It should be looking at something sustainable for everybody. In this rohi of ours, in this community, we have a white elephant down here, the big thing that we all contributed to build. We have a stadium. They're all white elephants because us, the end user, we can't afford to pay to use them. That's what I'm saying. So if the council can come to me and say to my sporting club and our JAB community and our soccer community and our netball, say, yeah, we can cut our costs, we can fund, but you need to manage and maintain your systems and your environment, so you've got to pass that cost on. And what I'm saying is, the pokie machines, the gambling, they're helping us. They're helping us sustain our clubs and our entities.
Just letting you know, Mr. Whitewood, you have about a minute left
Yeah.
if you want to leave some room for questions.
I actually believed 10 minutes wasn't enough because I wanted to give you a lot of statistics, but I didn't want to waste time on statistics. I just wanted to put it in a nutshell. But from what the concept I had and what I had written down from when I come in here, I changed it listening to the other things, and I took what both lots say on both sides, for and against. But it's finding that fair and equitable, sharing amongst us as a community. We need to coexist together. The sinking lid's not going to work. Once they're gone, once the pokie machines, once those businesses move for whatever reason, and they cease to exist, it's going to die out. The reality is there's coming close to 250,000 people in the Western Bay, and we're squandering with our small numbers here. But how are we going to sustain our current community needs? That's what I'm asking, putting to the council. And if you can come up with a better alternative to a sinking lid policy, or to fund these sporting communities, then I've got open ears. I'm prepared to listen, as with every other sporting outfit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitewood. Now, unless there's a burning question, we are over time here. No, there appears not to be. Thank you very much for your well thought out submission.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Our next submitter is, yes, Ed Mercer. Thank you. And that is on page 17. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mercer.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. If you don't mind, I'll sit. I too am suffering from a sore knee. Okay. The reason I'm here is I've come to put a face on the harm done by gambling. Okay, I have a family member who is a problem gambler, has been for quite a number of years, and I have been personally seriously affected, as you can imagine. 2.5% of the population have a gambling problem. A large proportion of those gamblers have problems with the pokie machines, the Class 4 machines that we're here talking about. For every one of those people, and this is where I come in, 5 to 10 others are harmed by their gambling activities, whether it's their children, their parents, relatives. 5 to 10 other people. You've heard the population predictions for this community, so you do the maths. Okay, how many people in that community are going to be affected by problem gambling if something is not done about the pokies? So we've heard some supposed positives, excuse me, about sports and the contribution that these trusts make to sports. I've coached sport for 25 years. I'm a president of a sports club. And it wasn't until I had these personal problems with gambling that I started to think, and I'm ashamed of myself, because I used to think it was okay to take money from gaming trusts, I should say. And quite a few of the kids that I coach come from deprived backgrounds. Then I found out that some of those kids can't pay their fees, so we help, we just turn a blind eye. The reason they can't pay their fees, in some cases, not all of them, is that they come from backgrounds where their parents have got a problem with pokies. Simple as that. So here we are accepting money from these people and they've already paid. The kids are suffering, not their parents. Okay, so that's the reality, is that we are doing harm within the community, and some of those people playing sport or trying to play sport to better themselves are being deprived because of the very source of the funding. So I'll leave you with that thought. Let's talk about economics. How many of you realise that it's illegal for a pokie venue to derive a substantial proportion of its profits from pokie machines? And in fact, they must demonstrate that they can stand alone as a business without pokie machines. If you can't do that, legally they're not allowed to be in business. Now you may, I'm sorry I got here late, but have you heard anything about controls on gambling, for example? How there's already adequate measures in place? Well, I don't know whether that was part of the submissions.
There's been a little bit, but...
Okay, that's good. Well, I can tell you now that what I have done is, because of this problem, is I got very interested in this. I've learnt more about pokies in particular, not other forms of gambling, but pokies, than I ever wanted to know. And it's a dirty, dark industry with political interference at all levels. It's not a nice scene, I can assure you. I have spoken to inspectors from the Internal Affairs Department, and I have never met more disgruntled, unhappy, miserable people in their jobs. I asked them why. Why do people gamble? Why do these things exist? And they said, because the government doesn't want to put its hand in its pocket to support some of the things they do. They're perfectly happy to let these continue. And how many of you know about problem gamblers? They can self-ban from establishments. So what they do is they get the photograph taken, and every gaming establishment has a little red folder. When somebody walks in there, they're supposed to recognise them, the staff are supposed to be familiar, and they're supposed to manage it, and they're supposed to turn those people away. Well, they don't. I've talked to plenty of problem gamblers affected by pokies. You can go anywhere you like. One of the reasons, problem gambler who dobs in an establishment is liable for a $400 fine. So how's that for a disincentive to report non-compliance with the law for these establishments? The person doing it gets nailed $400. And yes, the Internal Affairs Department will investigate with their disillusioned officers, and you'll be lucky if the establishment gets a slap over the wrist with a wet bus ticket. Half of all establishments that they look at don't comply with the law. So I could go on for ages, but I just wonder what Peter Dunn would think of Operation Chestnut, or what his comments would be on that at the moment. I'd seriously suggest, and I applaud the District Council for having done this survey that you've carried out. I think that really shows you what this community wants to happen. Less machines, lots less. They want them out of deprived areas. So do your homework, have a look at what Operation Chestnut is, and I think that should show these gaming trusts in a different light. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer. I'm going to open that for questions if you're happy to answer any questions from around the table. Do I have any questions from the councillors? Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, it's not so much a question, but I just wanted to really thank you for your very heartfelt submission. It must have been hard for you to come up here and speak on such a personal matter. Thank you.
It has been. I've done it at other venues, and it's the least I can do, and I am deadly serious about the harm. The last thing this community needs is more pokie machines. In fact, you want to get rid of the whole damn lot, and you'll be a lot better off.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mercer, and I'd just like to reiterate the thank you for coming and sharing what's obviously been a very personal journey for you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Delia McKinnon, and that is on page 18. Kia ora. Thank you. Please take a seat. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is my cousin Hariata, who came up before. I'm here on behalf of my family, and having such passion for children and their right to grow up without harm. Up until 2014, I was the lecturer at Wairiki Institute of Technology and Social Work. Prior to that, I worked with family and children for Te Akatiri Wetawhi Trust. Prior to that, I was the deputy manager at the Children's Health Camp working with children. I come from a health background originally, training as a nurse at Waikato Hospital. So my life has been in the public arena. And I have a passion for children because I think they have a right to grow up without harm. My submission is around families who gamble and leave their children wanting. And I think in my submission I mentioned about people going gambling and coming out and borrowing money so they can feed their children because they no longer have their benefit or whatever it is, wages. And then the next time around find it difficult because they've had to repay everything and so they're back to square one. They're still in that impoverished. Children have a right to grow up without harm through poverty or otherwise. People who gamble in establishments often forget to stop. And therefore, their children suffer. They themselves suffer because they will either use their rent money, their kai money, anything to gamble. But inevitably our children who grow up in these situations suffer in other things. Illness, poor nutrition, they don't do well at school, they play hooky. They often will tonu for their lunch from other kids, taihaya, which means take. And I've worked with these children. And when you look into their background and try to work with their family, these are some of the influences. Now, those who do gamble inside the establishments, often it's in little clubs and pubs. So they drink as well. So that their money is being used twice, not only in gambling, but the other things that are associated with it. I have a little story to tell. I told one in my submission. But this is about a young boy of about 10 in Brooklyn Road. I went shopping at the IGA store there, the Four Square, and this kid was screaming at his mother, and excuse me, I don't mean to be derogatory, but I will use his words and his words alone. Hurry up, Mum. I want to go home, I'm hungry. Oh, just a minute, son, the jackpot's about to really go off. He said, fuck the jackpots. I'm hungry, Mum. I want to go home. She said, I won't be long. So she goes back inside, whether the jackpot went off or not. By then I'd gone to the greengrocers and I'd come out and the mother was outside again and the kid was saying it again. I felt like I should go and buy this boy some kai. But at the end of the day, I thought about it and I thought, if I do this, what does it do for him and his parent? I should be reporting this kid and the parent to Child, Youth and Families. But those are the things that some children have to put up with. And it's always in low socio-economical groups. Do you see a pokie machine in somewhere like Limmore or Springfield? Those places don't exist with those things. It's always in the low socio-economical. And it's always about going for the big win. That's only one incident where I've worked with families and kids with gambling issues. Now, I grew up in an era where there was only a TAB. You didn't have pokie machines in the 50s and 60s, nor the 70s. Those didn't come until the late 80s and 90s. And there weren't as many as there is now. So I support the council in not increasing pokie machines. I don't think that we should risk our community that way, especially the lives of our children, because it leads to many, many other issues like domestic violence, alcohol. I've heard some things that says there's no correlation. Well, I disagree, because I work at the coalface. Without having to do an absolute research paper on it, you see these things because they face you every day. So that's why I believe that poker machines should not be increased. I don't care if you vote that they shouldn't be relocated, because I agree they shouldn't be. You can get all the funding you can off places like Sovereign Trust, but it goes nowhere to addressing the absolute need of fixing these problems. Because you can't apply for millions of dollars, you can only apply for so much, and that so much doesn't address the issues. That's me.
Thank you very much, Delia. That's very heartfelt. Now, questions? Yes. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, like our Chair has said, it was a very heartfelt presentation, and thank you for being very open and frank with us about what you have seen and experienced and what it's like for our people and families within the community. I'm just wanting to know, and thank you for your personal perspective, but is your experience something that you're seeing that many others in the community are seeing as well, or are these just acute situations?
Oh, I think that many of us who work in the community here today have seen those things. I don't believe they're isolated instances at all. They happen all over the place, whether it's in Rotorua or it's in another town or city. I believe those who work closely in the community with families see it all the time. They deal with it all the time.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. Thank you very much, and thank you again for coming up, Hariata, in support. Thank you. Our next speaker submitted today is Samantha White, and that is on page 18. Thank you, Samantha. Please just turn your microphone on, just push the... Thank you.
Tēnā koutou. I'm here to verbalise my written submission. I don't have personal experience of problem gambling, but there's enough out there to know that if you want a vibrant and positive community, then pokie machines are not the way to go. It's well documented that gambling harms communities. Choice doesn't come into it when the facts show that lower socio-economic communities are targeted for sites. As a community, we all have a responsibility to ensure the best interests of residents and ratepayers are put ahead of business profits. No amount of gambling support funding that comes from the industry can repair the damage that is felt wider than just the individual. We've just previously heard, about families, and it's also well documented that where there's poverty, there's increased domestic violence and increased amount of kids going hungry. So I don't think it's rocket science about if Rotorua wants to grow and be successful as a community where families are successful, then we as a community need to be supporting the reduction of pokie machines in our community. So I hope the council look to do this year on year, and I think eventually we will see the benefit of that. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mrs. White. Now, are there any questions around the table? Yes, Mayor Steve.
Samantha, in your role, do you see families that come to you, or is this a philosophy that you have?
I don't have a professional role. It's just, and I don't have any personal experience of it. It's just what is out there is well documented. It's in the media, and for me, if the media are reporting it, it's there's been increased press coverage of the problems and where these pokie machines are located, and it's been said by other people, not just me, but also in the press, that there is a target of location, and so that begs the question why, and that isn't healthy.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Samantha. It's good to see you again. As you may have heard, we have had a lot of submissions from organisations that are actually against our policy. So I'm just wanting to know what are your thoughts on, although it's well documented, as you say, on the harm, how do we as council balance out reducing that harm through this policy and also making sure that there are still benefits out there in the community that they receive from the funding of such organisations?
Yes, having had a previous role of funding, a role that was fundraising for a charity, I can see there would be that argument that there's money that wouldn't be there for organisations. However, the money that's coming out of organisations that run pokie machines is not contributing to the local economy and communities that covers that harm that's caused. It never will. So I think the balance is whether or not the harm to communities is there. Are we really looking after communities by saying, oh, there's a little bit of pocket of putia there for, community groups, when there's another part of the community that's suffering hugely because of the harm that pokie machines cause. I think from the policy it's going to be a long way off there never being any pokie machines, so it's a reduction, and again it's where the focus of those pokie machines are currently. It's harming those communities that need the support more than the harm.
Thank you, Samantha. No, there appears to be no further questions. And thank you again for coming to submit on this very important subject for us all. Okay, the next submitter is Linda. Yes, Linda Tiro. Linda, have you arrived yet? Okay, just walking in. Excellent. We had one of our speakers has withdrawn, so we've moved up to our 12:20 slot, and that's on page 25. So we'll just let Linda catch her breath. Welcome, Linda. Nothing like being in the hot seat the minute you walk in the door. Thank you for being prepared to and able to attend earlier than the time we have allotted you. So just get yourself settled. Rick's turned on your microphone, and just begin when you're ready. Welcome. And you have 10 minutes, and I'll wave my hand when we get to near the 8.5 to 9 minute mark, so that you can leave room for questions if you haven't finished by then. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, thank you. Kia ora tātou. My name's Linda Tiro, and I work for the Problem Gambling Foundation as a counsellor. I've had over a decade's worth of experience working in the addiction sector with primarily drugs and alcohol, and more recently with gambling. I guess my concern is, as the clients who come to our service, I see the impact of addiction to the pokies and what that means, not only for clients but also their whānau as well. And what surprised me after, spending a decade working with drugs and alcohol, excuse me, is in fact that a lot of what I see with people with gambling addiction can be even more devastating than those who have drug and alcohol addiction. And in fact, those who perhaps have struggled with both addictions often speak about their gambling addiction as being the most difficult and the most impactful on their lives. So the concerns I have, and I thoroughly support the proposal of a sinking lid policy, for the Rotorua area. There are referral rates here in Rotorua are steady. So we see, a number of people with gambling issues. What concerns me is the number who we're not seeing, who aren't, for a variety of reasons, accessing services. The clients that I have coming to see me speak about issues such as not being able to put kai on the table, looking at the faces of their children, because their money that usually would be there for supporting the whānau has inadvertently gone into a machine. And often people powerless in the face of their addiction, powerless to make changes, and even, clients themselves will find it difficult to explain why they are addicted, that it's unfathomable that something such as gambling has created such kind of havoc in their lives. So the concerns I have, I see people facing eviction because they're unable to pay for their rent, like I mentioned before, unable to put kai on the table. And I guess it's those young children and other family members who we don't hear their voice. We don't, they're often too young and caught up in a family system where there are addiction issues such as gambling, that impact on their lives. One of the other concerns I have is that although gambling for many may be a form of entertainment and might not impact largely on other areas of their lives, the clients that we see through our service, it has become a major issue. And I think we've, become reliant on pokies in terms of community funding, and that concerns me because perhaps we're, through the community funding, trying to assist the same families that are in fact sinking their money into the machines. And if we didn't have the machines, then perhaps there wouldn't be such a demand on some of our social services. Yeah, so it's a bit of a vicious cycle, I think. And I know one of the things that like the Problem Gambling Foundation and myself advocate for is a more ethical kind of funding model, where we're not benefiting from the harm that may be occurring in other people's lives. I know personally myself, I don't know that I would feel that good about my son or daughter, receiving money that I know has perhaps disadvantaged someone else in the community. So I think the issue with gambling is that often it's such a hidden issue. Of all addictions, it's the most easy to hide. It's you might notice somebody in your family who has a drug and alcohol problem. Gambling can go unseen for quite some time until things are at real crisis levels, or even where people have been driven to criminal activity, stealing from employers, things like that in order to fund their gambling habit, and things that usually that they would never ever have contemplated and find themselves in. The other main concern is I have a lot of people presenting with suicidal ideation or presenting with suicide attempts, and it surprised even myself that with gambling you've got 4 times the risk of suicide for any other addiction. And that was, working with, in the past with people, with quite heavy addictions to methamphetamine and other drugs and alcohol, to see that, gambling has such a risk to people's mental health. And also the correlation between not only the gambling but violence in homes as well. So the impact there in terms of people getting frustrated with partners, because of gambling, or those gambling themselves, taking out their frustrations in their family systems as well. So it's an area that I certainly feel quite passionate about, and the clients that come in and see us are from all walks of life. This is an addiction that can impact on anybody, and I think for anyone who's either experienced addiction, in recovery themselves, or has a family member struggling with addiction, it's nothing you would want to wish on anybody, any loved one in your family system. And I think that this here is, the Rotorua Lakes Council have an opportunity here to, have a look and have give some direction and policy around what's happening in this district. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I have a question from Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Linda. Great to hear from someone at the coalface of the problem. So could you tell us, you've said that your referral rates are steady. Can you give us any indication of the percentage of referrals that are as a result of pokie machines versus other forms of gambling that are less controlled, maybe, such as lotto or online, that sort of thing?
Okay. I certainly don't have those figures, but we could probably, our research department could probably get those for you. But what I do know is that the majority of people who present to the Problem Gambling Foundation here in Rotorua, it would be primarily pokies.
Sort of alluded to it, thank you, Linda, the methamphetamine, which is we're reading more and more about, and yet the referral rates are quite steady. Has there been no increase in referral rates for those with methamphetamine addiction and gambling?
Okay. I haven't got any research, but just from what I'm observing, there certainly is I feel a connection between methamphetamine and gambling. That often people will use gambling as a form of trying to, get money to support a methamphetamine habit.
Thank you. Final question, Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Linda. And thank you for your emotional and passionate speech and something that's really affecting the community. Based on the sinking lid policy, how long do you think it'll take to reduce gambling to a point where it is acceptable? How many years? I mean, considering that the social problems that you've mentioned, you probably need a more immediate solution.
Yeah, well, that's quite a difficult question to ask. I think if there were less machines available, there may, people would therefore have less opportunity. Yeah, it's difficult to put a time frame on that. Yeah.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just adding to that question, I guess. So You mentioned that problem gambling is quite easy for people to hide. And do you think that's partly because there are so many machines are available, so if they start to be noticed at one venue, they can move to another one and another one and another one, so that no one really picks up they're having issues? Or is it more people are going to their local venue and gambling there, and it's just not noticed?
Yeah, people tend to have their favourite venues. They also have their favourite machines. They build quite a relationship with that machine. They've even been known to stroke the machine, talk to it. So they, certainly, they seem to have a connection. I think that also the way venues are set up is that the gaming areas are in a dark area. There's no windows. It's very easy to be in there and not be noticed by others coming in. I think that kind of the way venues are set up like that, it kind of enables people to continue and to hide it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I am going to wrap that up now. Thank you.
Okay.
Just mindful of being fair with our time with everybody.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Linda, again for coming in early and for giving some background to us on something that you're intimately familiar with in your role with the Problem Gambling Foundation. Okay, on that note, we are going to break for lunch now. So thank you for your attendance and thank you for everyone, the submitters in the public gallery, and we will recommence our hearing at 1 p.m. Thank you.